Hello, everybody. Welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go over the concept of Chidra Grahas, or planets of vulnerability. Excuse me, and this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. If you're new to Vedic astrology or Jyotish, as it's known as in Sanskrit, or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are in my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means I have a teaching video on that topic if you like to learn more. There's a lot of jargon in astrology, and especially with Vedic astrology. So if there's something that's a word or term you don't understand, and you see the double asterisk, you can learn more. So for this video, I think it's fairly straightforward. Um, but there are a few videos it would be helpful to watch to get the most out of this video if you're not familiar, or especially if you're a newbie. So the first video is North, South, and East Indian style charts. I do also cover Western charts in that talk, but I don't have it in the title. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. The Lugna, also known as the ascendant rising sign first house. Introduction to the constellations or rashis. Natural benefic and malefic planets. Symbolism of the planets and grahas playlist. So I have a whole playlist on each classic planet or graha in Jyotish, and so you can learn more about symbolism. And that's going to be really critical for the talk today. If you don't know them, you can review, or you can review. If you don't know them, you can learn them, or if you know them but it's been a while, you can review them. And then the other thing that's going to be important is symbolism of the houses and bhavas. I have a growing playlist there. I've gone through most of the houses so far. We have a few more to do. But, it's going to be, again, an integration of planets and houses to get information as far as Chidra Grahas are concerned. Okay, so what is a Chidra Graha? Well, Chidra literally means whole in Sanskrit, and Graha means planet. So when you put, these two words together, what you get is like a weak spot, like a hole, like a vulnerability point. Achilles heel, you can think about it that way, and also literally it could be like a piercing. So this is going to be, when you see it, when you determine the Chidra Grahas in somebody's chart, if you can determine the Chidra Grahas in somebody's chart, and we'll talk about when you can and when you can't. But if you can determine that, that'll give you more information about the planets that are the Chidra Grahas. Symbolism of those planets may be a weak spot for the person, either literally, figuratively, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So there's things to look out for potentially. Um, so, and, they're just kind of things, sometimes they're also a little bit of a blind spot. Not always, but again, it's more of a vulnerability spot. So like when you find a Chidragraha, determine a Chidragraha, how exactly is it a weak spot for somebody? Well, the things that it symbolizes, the planet, those things can be an issue for somebody, and especially medically. So, and I'll give you an example chart so we can go through, make it more concrete, the learning here. But like literally, like if we're talking about medically and like the physical body, when you have the places where you have Chidragraha, somebody may literally have piercing because, again, a hole was introduced, right? You introduce a hole in ink to create, or sorry, a hole with a metal to create a piercing. It could also be a tattoo, someplace where somebody has a tattoo, where you introduce a hole through a needle and then introduce ink. And it could also be surgery. So not necessarily, but these are possibilities here for somebody. The other thing is that the houses or bhavas that the planet owns can be challenged or challenging for somebody. And then the other thing is that the planetary periods or subperiods, so dashas and antras, that are run, when the Chidra Grahas are run through their planetary period, that can also be a really challenging time for somebody. Okay, so we've got what the planet symbolizes, the houses that they own, what they symbolize, and then also the planetary periods that the Chitra has run. Can all be, you know, um, uh, again, a challenging time or kind of a vulnerable time for somebody. And it may not be obvious from the natal chart, as we get into from the in the example. So how do you determine the Chidra Grahas for somebody's chart? Well, first of all, you need an exact birth time because the way you determine the Chidra Grahas is by looking at what are called the amshas, also known as the subzodiacs, also known as the divisional charts. So if you know how these charts are created, you basically take the natal chart and you slice and dice each constellation into smaller and smaller pieces or bits, and then you get these subcharts. Now, the thing is, the subchart, because the subcharts are pieces and bits of the natal chart, they move very, very fast. And the higher the number, like if you were looking at the D60, essentially what that means is you've cut up one constellation into 60 parts. And so, like, literally, I think it's like every minute, the lugna for these amshas, these subdivisional charts, changes. So because these amshas are so finely tuned and so finicky in terms of timing, if you don't have an exact birth chart, excuse me, exact birth time, then I wouldn't even try this because you'll end up with wrong planets and it'll probably throw you off. The other thing to know is even if you have an exact birth time, you still, I always assume a few minutes range. And if you've ever seen my videos where I go through like historical charts of famous people, birth charts often don't have an exact birth time. Like it's like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 10:30. And it's unlikely that everybody born before 1900 was born at like 10 or 10:30. Like like on the hour or the half hour or something like that. So historically, the birth charts may not be accurate. The other thing is that, when you're in a birthing room, a lot's going on. And so is somebody exactly watching the time, or do they call it a minute or two later than when the baby comes out? Or, maybe if the baby's in crisis, nobody's looking at the time or the clock in the room is off. So even an exact birth time, is not always exact, the one that you're given. So you got to keep that in mind. Okay, so now how do you look at examine the amshas or subzodiacs divisional charts to find out the Chidra Grahas? Well, there are two subzodiacs, two divisional charts you want to look at. The first one is the D9 or the Navamsha. And then what you do there is you find the fourth constellation or Rashi from the moon in the D9 in the Navamsha. And then you find out the ruler of that fourth constellation or Rashi from the moon, and that's your first Chidra Graha. Then you find the fourth constellation Rashi from the Lugna in the D9, and you find out the ruler for the fourth constellation from the Lugna. Okay. Now the thing is, you see, even in my slide here, I have the moon, Rashi, constellation slash Rashi from the moon, and Lugna, and I have Lugna in parentheses. The reason why I have Lugna in parentheses is because the Lugna moves so quickly with the Amshas. This one, is a little bit more iffy. Any Chidra Graha you determine from the Lugna of an Amsha is going to be more iffy. So it's sort of like it's probably an Amsha, it's probably a Chidra Graha, it may be a Chidra Graha, it's likely to be a Chidra Graha, but you know, there's a little more, I would say more standard deviation, I guess. Um, Whereas if you take the fourth constellation Rashi from the moon, even if the Lugna changes, the fourth constellation Rashi from the moon doesn't change as fast as the Lugna itself of these Amshas. Okay, so what that means is the Chidra Grahas you determined from the moon in these subzodiacs is more reliable than the Chidra Grahas you would assess from the Lugna of these Amshas, subzodiacs. Okay, so the first two Chidra Grahas you get from the D9, fourth constellation ruler from the moon, and the fourth constellation ruler from the Lugna. Then you want to look at the D3, the Dracana, and then the Dracana you take the ruler of the eighth constellation, or Rashi from the moon, and then you take the ruler of eighth constellation or Rashi from the Lugna. And again, the Lugna here is in parentheses to remind you that these lugnas are, especially the higher number you get, the faster they're shifting. Every few minutes they're shifting. So again, even with an exact birth time, you never quite know, right? If it's an exact birth time, even if you're in the room, maybe the electricity went out and the clock went off or something for a few minutes, you never know. So anyway, So again, the Chidra Graha is determined from the moon, and the Navamsha and the Drakana are more reliable than the Chidra Graha is determined by the Lagna because the Lagna is moving so fast. Okay, so when you're doing your assessment, you may actually want to put parentheses just to remind yourself. Okay, so let's actually look at some examples here beyond the theory. Okay, so I have a D9, a Navamsha on the left, sub-zodiac, and I have a D3 Drakana sub-zodiac or divisional chart on the right. Okay, so, and this is actually somebody's chart, so but just to find the Chidra Grahas first. So in a D9, you're looking for the fourth constellation or Rashi ruler from the moon. So the moon is in the 12th house here, and you count inclusively 1, 2, 3, 4. That'll land you in the third house where that little 11 is. And I circled that 11. That 11 represents the 11th zodiac, um, the 11th constellation of the zodiac, which is Aquarius, and it's ruled by Saturn. So Saturn is your first Chidra Graha here. And again, because we're looking at it from the moon, this is the more reliable of the two Chidra Grahas that we'll get from this chart. Okay, now to get the second Chidra Graha in the Navamsha, you start at the Lagna at the top of the chart, and you count 4 houses away inclusively, 1, 2, 3, 4. It takes you to the 4th house here in this Navamsha. And you can see I circled the little 12 here. 12 represents the 12th constellation or Rashi of the zodiac, which is Pisces, and Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. So the Chidra Graha from the Lagna in this Navamsha is Jupiter. And again, I put in parentheses to remind myself that it's probably Jupiter if we have an exact time. We do have a true exact birth time, but maybe not. Okay. Then we do the similar thing, with different counting away, but it's sort of a similar thing in the D3 Dracana. So we look for the 8th constellation or Rashi from the moon. The moon in this Dracana, D3 is in the 3rd house. We count 8 houses away inclusively. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That lands us again at Pisces. I circled the 12th here. The 12th constellation of the zodiac is Pisces. Pisces ruled by Jupiter. So now in the Dracana, the Chidra Graha from the moon is Jupiter. So, oh, look at that. Jupiter popped up twice here. We potentially have a double Chidra Graha. Okay, and that's the thing is, part of the reason why I chose this chart is that, again, everybody's like, oh, Jupiter's the great benefic, but, it is possible, for example, for Jupiter to be a quadruple, double, triple, quadruple Chidra Graha, in which case Jupiter may actually bring negative things. It's not always, even though I typically talk about Jupiter as Santa Claus, it may be that Santa Claus brings you some coal, some years, that sort of thing. So anyway, again, in this Dracana, the Chidra Graha from the moon is Jupiter. Then if we're looking for the Chidra Graha from the Lagna, again, we're looking for the 8th constellation or Rashi from the Lagna, which we start at the top and count 8 houses inclusively, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That lands us at the 8th house in this Dracana, which is ruled by Capricorn, and Capricorn's ruled by Saturn. So Saturn and Dracana is the Chidra Graha from the Lagna, and I put that in parentheses to again remind myself that the Chidra Grahas, all the Chidra Grahas from the Lagna, there's more possibility that they're not accurate. Again, because there's always, we're slicing and dicing minutes and seconds here with some of these amshas and birth times. Okay. So in this chart, we have Saturn, Jupiter, with 2 Chidragas from the Navamsha, and we have Jupiter, Saturn coming from the Dracana. So Saturn and Jupiter are both double Chidragrahas for this person. Okay, now let's look at their natal chart. Okay, so we just looked at the amshas, the Chidragas. Okay, so from the last slide, Jupiter and Saturn are both, double Chidragrahas for this chart. Okay, and even if you just take the ones from the moon, Jupiter and Saturn are still Chidragrahas. So, Okay, now where are Jupiter and Saturn in this chart? Well, Jupiter and Saturn happen to be in the fourth house for this person. So, you might be like, oh, as an astrologer, because what that means is the two Chidra Grahas that are double Chidra Grahas are in the fourth house. That means that there can be a lot of vulnerability related to fourth house matters. So, what are fourth house matters? Home, mother, education, happiness, chest area medically, the chest. So, like the lungs, could also be, some people take heart for the fourth house. Also, for women, especially the breast tissue. And as I mentioned, Chidra Grahas can literally, not always, but sometimes they can literally indicate places where people have piercings, tattoos, and or surgery. So, that's of note here in this chart. Now, okay, so we have, and again, in this chart, both double Chidra Grahas happen to be in the same house. I mean, that's sort of like, a red light, warning light here. And then just very simply, what does Jupiter represent? Jupiter represents children. Jupiter represents education, and education, as you saw, is the fourth house, children, home. And then Jupiter also represents expansion. Excuse me. Then we have Saturn here. What does Saturn represent? Saturn represents things like obstacles, delays, chronic illness, and also structure. So when I saw this, and this happens to be a woman, um, I was thinking that, especially because of Jupiter and Saturn together, expansion and structure, this is kind of indicating to me that this person might be at risk for something like breast cancer. Okay, now again, that doesn't mean everybody who has this combination is going to have breast cancer. And even this person, I'm not saying is going to have breast cancer, but maybe, again, we'd have to do more assessment for when they run these planets. And that's part of the deal too that you got to do. But, you got to then, like for this person, when they run Jupiter and Saturn, I want to go back to their health amshas. So like the D6, D8, D27 to see where Jupiter and Saturn are placed. If they're well placed in the health amshas, then I would think maybe this person, maybe they'll get like a lumpectomy or something like that. Like maybe they'll be a spot and they'll do like a biopsy and they'll do a lumpectomy and it won't be too big of a deal. But when they run these planets and if they're negatively placed in the health amshas, then I would start thinking, well, this might become a bigger deal. Okay. Now the thing is with this person, they are currently running the Rahu Moon Dasha period. Okay, so just from that, you can see they've probably got a lot of stress going on here, just from Rahu Moon. But you can see after Rahu comes Jupiter Mahadasha. So the first, double Chitra Graha. And then after the Jupiter Mahadasha, there's a Saturn Mahadasha. So Jupiter Mahadasha for this person begins September 2025. I mean, it's a year and a half away. That's around the corner. And then Saturn period doesn't start until 2041. But what that means is, and these are both long Mahadashas, basically starting next year in about, a year and a half, this person is going to be running these two double Chidra Grahas for the rest of their life, essentially. Because these are long periods here. So, for this person, when I talked to them, I said, you want to keep up with your mammograms and things like that to make sure that you don't miss something here and you stay on top of this. The other thing to note is that, again, when you start the Jupiter Mahadasha, you're going to be in Jupiter for a while. And then right after Jupiter, you're going to get into Jupiter Saturn. So Jupiter Saturn, then you're going to be running both of these double Chidra Grahas. And then the other thing is not only, so Jupiter, maybe some stuff shows up and it's not that big of a deal, but then with Saturn, maybe things change a little bit here. The other thing is that Saturn, because it's in her fourth house, Saturn is aspecting her lugna of, whole body. And she does run the Jupiter Saturn Dasha, from October 2027 to May. I need to change this. Hold on a second. S Okay, sorry about that. There's probably a skip in the audio or something, but and also I changed the date here. I wrote the wrong date on the slide. So I changed the date so we have the right dates for Jupiter Saturn dasha. This person's going to be running Jupiter Saturn dasha from October 2027 to May 2030. So I would think that would be, as an astrologer, I'd really be looking at that time. Again, it's a little bit far out for the time being. I just said, you want to keep up on your mammograms and stuff like that. But, if we do another reading close to that time, I'd probably want to dig into the health amshas, excuse me, to see more about what may be coming for them. So, again, this is just a first pass at Chidra Grahas for somebody's chart and how you integrate the Chidra Grahas, how you find the Chidra Grahas and the amshas, the D3 and the D9, and then again, how you bring that information back to the natal chart. But then again, now there's, it's definitely some questions in my mind. So when we get to that time, it's a little bit far out right now at this moment. But sorry. But anyway, when we get closer to that time, I'd want to go deeper into the health amshas to see what Jupiter and Saturn are doing, especially during this Jupiter Saturn dasha, to see what might be coming. So again, you always want to integrate. That's how you integrate the amshas. Amshas, natal chart, go back to the amshas depending on when the dashas are running. And again, the amshas are used mostly for timing, but you do get timing is kala in Sanskrit. But there is some indication of outcomes. But you don't typically use the amshas by themselves. You always integrate the amshas with the natal chart to bring it back. So at least the Jupiter and Saturn are in, they are in positives here in the D1, the natal chart. The only thing though is that Saturn is also the lord of the 8th house you can see here, which is again, chronic disease and stuff like that. So yeah, it's and then again, there's also this juxtaposition of the great benefic with the great malefic. Right, Jupiter's sort of, some people think of it as like the best planet and Saturn's like the worst planet. That's not always true, but especially when they're both Jebel Chidra Graha as well. That changes that story up, doesn't it? Right? So there you go. So Chidra Grahas, how you find them, and again, at least a first pass at how you start to integrate that information with the rest of the natal chart. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by and listening to one of my talks. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology and Jyotish are in my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. I also do personal birth chart readings on Zoom, so if that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. At the time of this recording, we are coming up on some eclipses. I don't typically do readings during the eclipse period because the energy is too chaotic, but if you're interested in a birth chart reading, at least you can get the information and we could schedule something after the eclipses. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, and there I cover other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, traditional Indian medicine and yoga. And I talk about other paradigms of natural medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care. So that's out there too if that's interesting or helpful to you. So, as always, I hope you found this talk interesting, helpful, and useful to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. So, until the next one, take care. Namaste.